As I said a couple of videos ago, I will be testing my smart contract by using the Mocha testing framework. I'm going to give a quick refresher of Mocha and how it works. If you have already used it, you can forego watching this video. Now, I will assume whoever's watching is ready to learn about Mocha. Mocha is a test running framework. We can use Mocha to test any kind of JavaScript code we want. We can use it to test a front-end application, a back-end application, or Ethereum, which, uh, which is what I'm going to do now. So it's a general purpose testing framework. As a general purpose testing framework, it has a small set of functions that we need to understand. So let's go over the three functions that we need to understand to ensure we can work with Mocha. And I'm going to pull up a diagram to help along this endeavor. And I'll share that with you all and resize it. See, I think I can resize it a bit more than that. Okay. So there are three main functions we need to be aware of: it, describe, and before each. The it function, uh, the purpose of it, or the purpose of it, the it function, is to run one individual assertion on something we are trying to test. This is really the unit of measurement for testing. Um, Assertion, so when I say assertion, I mean taking two values, one that our code has produced, and then another value that we think should be equal to that variable. And we compare the two together to ensure the value produced by the code is as expected. That is referred to as an assertion. So if the it statement is um, the core of any test, then describe is used to group it functions together. Describe just serves to keep our tests organized by grouping together certain it functions that are testing the same thing. And we're going to see an example of that soon. The last built-in function is the before each function. It's a utility function that is used to extract some amount of logic that is common to a lot of our tests. So for example, if we have multiple it functions um, that are all doing similar logic, then we can use a before each function to extract that logic and only write code out one time. At this point, I just gave you a high-level overview of these functions. Writing tests is something you will have to do out there in the real world. So why don't we just get our hands dirty and start? So I'm going to head back to Code Editor. All right. All right. So I'm going to, the following test that I'm going to write is just going to be as a test. It's not necessarily part of the smart contract test that I'll be writing. This is just a brief lesson on how to use Mocha. And so just go ahead. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to create a class of car. And we're going to have it do two things. And so bear with me a moment while I develop these functions that this class of car is going to do, and I'll explain that in a minute. All right, so it's a class, right? So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to implement Mocha to run some tests over this class of car and assert that calling that calling park and calling drive both return stopped and room, respectively. So underneath the class of car, we'll make a call with the describe function. So describe is used to group together certain tests that are all testing the same thing. So I'll go ahead and do describe and car. Now the string of car that I just passed into describe is not a special keyword. It's so that I can have something to look at in the report so I understand what set of tests I'm about to run. It can be anything we want, actually. It's only used for organizational purposes. And since the class, this test here is testing the class of car, um, then this is going to be, I'm making this string also car. All right. So the second part of the describe function is going to be another function. And so in this case is actually, I'm going to make it an arrow function. Right. And so the arrow function is going to contain all the it statements that I write that are supposed to be testing the class of car. So inside of the describe block will be one or more it statements. So let's try one now. So I'll go ahead and do it, say can park. I'll do that. And another arrow function. And so inside this arrow function is where I'm going to write my actual test setup and assertion logic. My goal is to ensure that if I call park, that I make sure that the string of stopped is returned. So I need an instance of class park. So inside the it block, I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll do const car, set that equal to new car. So then we can call park and write an assertion to ensure that we're returning the string of stopped. So to make sure that this assertion that I'm going to use um, is coming from the assert library, I go up here and I look to see, okay, const assert require assert. All right. So, and now that's part of the Node standard library with a variety of functions to ensure that one value is equal to another. And assert has many more functions that allow us to write effective tests as well. And I'm going to be working with those later to write code around Ethereum contracts. Okay, so I'll go ahead and write my assertion. So assert dot equal car dot park, and then the string of stopped. Right. So inside equal, we are always going to add the value provided provided by the code and the value it should output. So assert.equal ensures that these two values here, this one and this one, are completely equal. And if they are, the test passes. If not, the test fails. So now that I have one test put together, I'm going to go ahead and save it, and I'm going to run Mocha inside the project. And so what I have to do now before I actually run the test, I have to go to package.json file, and you'll see in here that we have under scripts, we have tests, and then we have like, this is just kind of boilerplate that we get whenever we do an npm init. And now because I actually have a test suite, I can actually just type in here Mocha. And so, yeah. And so now it'll know that Mocha is the test suite that we're going to use. And so now I can go to the command line. And let's see, I want to share the command line with you. All right, great. And what I'm going to do is, what I will do, so I want you to pay attention to the bottom right-hand square, little black square box here. This is where we're going to run this. And so we're going to we run that test by doing an npm run test. And so that will automatically run the script, which internally will run the command Mocha. And you see where it says Mocha there. Okay. And so here we have the describe statement of car. And underneath it, our it statement prints out, and it appears to be passing here. So you see the it statement can park, checked with the green check mark, so one passing, so it passed. All right, so Now I can just as easily change the value so that you can see how this works when it doesn't pass. So I'll head back over to the code, and I can actually close the package.json now. And what I'll do is I'll just do a typo here, write a bunch of O's, save that, go back to the command line, and then just hit the up arrow, npm run test, run it again, and there you see the failure. Okay, because it's saying stop is should be equal to, or stopped is not equal to this one, which is stooped or whatever. So it expected for both to be equal, and they're not. So that's what that is saying there. Um, and so you should get used to this, by the way, because this is more real world. You're going to come and see your test has failed, and then you have to debug it to see what happened. So that's really usually, this is what you want to expect, or what you'll usually get is your tests failing, and then your job is to debug those. So I will head back to my code, and I'll fix that typo. I don't want to keep that there. So all right, so let's create, actually, let me show you that it'll pass again. Now that I fixed that, I'll go back to my code, to my command line, npm run test, and now you see it's passing again. So we verified that that test suite is actually working, and now we can go ahead on to our second it block, and we will say that it can drive. So it'll look like this. It can drive, and then again, the arrow syntax, or fat arrow function as is known colloquially, then const car, new car, and then assert dot equal, and then car dot drive, and then a string of room. So now we have two tests nested inside the describe block. So describe is simply about grouping things together, such as these sets of it statements. So now we'll head back to the command line again, and I'll go ahead and npm run test again. And you see that now two passing, so both of these assertions are passing. All right, so both tests are passing. And notice how both my it statements, when I go back to the code editor, I want you to take note that this line of code here, this one, and then this one are identical. So we've kind of repeated our code twice, and that's something that goes against the principles of dry, don't repeat yourself. And so both of my tests needed an instance of car before it could run, and that's why I had to write the same code twice. So I have this one line of code that's duplicated. Now that may not seem like much for this small little test, but think about it as the application scales. If we had many lines of code, we would not want to duplicate all this work. And instead, we want to engage in a solution in line with the dry principles of don't repeat yourself. So the solution to that would be the before each statement. And before each is used to execute some general code setup that is common to many tests inside our test file. So what I'll do is right above the describe block, I'll go ahead and write out the before each statement, before each function, and then I'll pass in a fat arrow function. And let's see, so I passed in the arrow function. Okay, so now any logic that I place inside this function right here will be executed before each it statement inside my code. So if I did like a console.log string of A and ran the test, I would expect to see that function run, then the it block runs, then the before each runs again, then the second it block runs. So before each is about running some common initializing code before each test. So I'm going to take the car initialization here, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it out, and I'll put it in here. All right. And what I can do is now I can close this gap here, and I can erase this same duplicate code here, right? Now, if you look at this, you may be thinking, okay, you know, something's amiss here. So notice how I defined a variable called car inside the before each function. When we define a variable inside a function, keep in mind how scope works in JavaScript. The variable car is only available inside this function, or any other function that may be nested inside the before each function block. However, the car variable is not available inside the it statement. If I ran this now, I would get an undefined for the const of car. So how do I do an initialization inside the before each, but still get access to that variable inside the it blocks? Solution: I'm going to take my variable declaration and I'm going to move it outside and above the before each declaration. And so I'm going to delete the const and before each here. So go ahead and get rid of this. And then up here, what I'll do is a let car. All right. So now the global execution context, there is a variable inside the global execution context called car that has been defined or at least initialized. Now, when I first initialize this, car will have a value of undefined because I have not yet assigned a value to it. However, when my test suite runs, it will first initialize the before each before the it statement runs. So we run the before each, the car variable is assigned a value, and when the first it statement runs, the car variable will be initialized and assigned a value of new car. An assertion around the car will be made. The before each will run again. It will redefine car with a new car, and then the second it statement runs. So the entire solution here revolves around understanding that the car variable needs to be defined ahead of time, and specifically defined with a let. We are using let because we need to change the value of car. I couldn't use const because it's not a constant, because in this before each function, car gets reassigned new car. So let me go ahead and test this in the command line. So once again, I'll run npm run test. And as you can see, all tests are still passing. At this point, we have an idea of how testing with Mocha works and how before each, describe, and it works. If you don't have a lot of experience with Mocha, no worries. I will be doing a lot more testing with Mocha in future videos. And the tests I will be writing will not be that much more complex than what you see here. And so I'll head back to my code, and what I'm going to be doing, I'm essentially going to erase all this because I was just using this just to show you how Mocha works. I'm definitely not going to be using any of this. Now, if you want, go ahead and copy this code, keep a copy of it, and keep practicing how Mocha works. But in terms of the lessons, this is the only reason why I was creating this code. I'm going to erase it now, and then in future videos, I will be writing code specific to testing my smart contract. And so thank you for watching.